Right, today we're going to be looking at a third type of numerical display for numerical data. And to do so, I collected the data from a lot of my students. And this represents the number of text messages per day that 30 of my students told me. Okay, so throughout this video, I'm going to ask you to pause at various times so that you can copy the information and then move to the app, Applet.com, so that you can enter the information. So go ahead and pause now and copy this data. All right, so in number 2, it asks us to use the applet on the iPad to create a histogram. So if I go to Applet.com, we'll see, we know this is quantitative data, okay? And it's a single group, so this is what I'll choose. Now, our variable name should be number of text messages sent per day, because that's the variable that we are measuring, okay? And then you'll input the data that you just copied down. You'll input this into the bar, separate it by commas or spaces. So go ahead and pause and do that. All right, so I have all the information in here now. So what it asks you to do, so it says begin analysis, but we want a histogram, so we'll choose this. And we want to copy it exactly as it is. So once again, go ahead and pause the video and copy it down. And this is what, so if you get your drawing down, make sure you copy it exactly. So I have number of text messages sent per day and frequency. Notice also that the scale is the same. I don't want to jump numbers. I don't want the spacing to be different. And same thing, and I know my frequency numbers got kind of squished in there. But the way we will read this, so I would say read as 0 up to 20. Okay, what that means is this box represents anything from 0 to less than 20. So 20 is included in this box. Okay, so this would actually represent 20 to up to 40 or 39. This represents 0 to up to 20, which would be 19. Okay, so now the question is, what percentages of the students sent less than 15 messages yesterday? Well, 15 would be right in here, which we can't see very clearly. And so this is one of the downsides of a histogram, is you can't know specifically 15 or less, but we can come up here and we can change the interval width. So this was just the interval width that was given to us, okay? But we'll change this to 15, and now we can see this. So less than 15, so this is from 0 to less than 15, there were 9. Okay, so 9 of the students, but it asks for a percent, so we need to then know the total. And there were 30 students. So I would say, well, 9 divided by 30 is 0.3, which is 30% of the students sent less than 15 messages yesterday. Okay, so now we want to describe the shape. And I'm going to go back to what we had originally with our histogram. And if I describe the shape, remember for shape we need, describe the distribution. I would need to describe the shape, the center, the variability, meaning how far is it spread out, and then are there any obvious outliers? Okay. So if we look at the shape, it looks like there's a lot on the left and then less on the right. So I would call this roughly skewed right. Okay? And notice I'm using the word roughly. Using a good descriptive word like roughly or about or fairly gives you, it says it's not perfectly skewed right, but it's roughly skewed right. Now, center of the data, and we're going to talk about this in later lessons, how to measure this exactly. But we want to know, like, half of the data is where? I want to know about what is the midpoint. And I'm going to say that the middle is roughly about 40. So I would say approximately centered around 40 text messages per day. And variability. So remember, this is how far the data is spread out. So we could say the data ranges, or the data is spread from about 0. And again, with a histogram, I don't know exactly, are there any zeros? And are there any 120s? But it's spread out from 0 to 120 messages. It would also be helpful to say that there's a gap, with a gap from 80 to 100. Okay, so unique features are important to describe. And then outliers, well, we see there's like 4 between 0 to 120. So you could say possible. We don't know for sure yet. Well, I'll give you information for how to know that later. But possible outliers, and again, this possible is good language to use. Possible outliers between 100 to 120. Okay? Now, it asks us to try changing the interval widths. Okay? And to see what happens. If I change this interval width to 5, well, we can see more specifics about the data, but it doesn't necessarily give us a big picture. Whereas if I change the width to, let's see, 30, well, we can see the skewed right more. It gives us a better picture of the data overall, but not specifics. So changing the interval width helps you in different ways. So I would say more or smaller intervals show more detail of the data, while larger intervals tend to give us a better big picture. Okay, and this is generally speaking because every data set is going to be different. So we have to understand that if we change the interval, it can show us more or less of one of these things. Okay, so now let's flip it over and get our big ideas from this lesson. Okay, our big ideas for histograms are what are benefits. Okay, so it groups data for a cleaner picture. Okay, I'm going to put a box here. Other important, the interval includes the first number, not the last. Okay, and what I'm saying here is it includes the left boundary, but not the right boundary. So 20 is the left boundary for this group, and so we include it with the next highest group. Okay. Using more intervals or smaller intervals shows more detail, but less pattern. Okay, so how to build one? Okay, number 1, choose equal intervals. And it's helpful if you look at the data and you kind of get an idea of what is my highest and lowest. If the highest and lowest are very close together, then you want to choose smaller intervals. But if the highest and lowest are very spread out, you're going to want larger intervals. Okay, so you need to choose those. Number 2, make a frequency table. You don't want to just jump right into the histogram. Make a frequency table, and I'll show you below what I mean. Number 3, draw, label, and scale the axes. And lastly, draw the bars with no spaces. Okay. And if we had a bar graph, which is for categorical data, there's spaces between those. Okay, but for histograms, there's no spaces. And then you can also use a relative frequency histogram, which gives us the percent when we're comparing groups. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do this on your own, and you can check the answers in Schoology, but I want to get you started. So it says, make a frequency histogram of the data using intervals of width 4 starting at age 40. Okay, so I know here that my starting age is going to be 40, and if I look up through the data, I see it looks like this is the highest, 69. So I have to go at least beyond 69. So I have 44, 48, 52, 56, 60, 64, 68, 72. So I'm getting a little ahead of myself based on this, but I want to see these intervals. So now I have an interval from 40 to less than 44. Okay, so I'm going to create a frequency table, and so I have 40 to less than 44, which is going to be 43 when we're talking about age. I'm going to have 44 to 47, 44 to less than 48, 48 to 51, because it has to be less than 52, 52 to 55, and then 56 to 56 to 59, 60 to 63. Okay, so that's all of my intervals. So now I'm just going to go through and create a tally chart. Okay, so 57 is here, 61 is here, 57, 57, 58, 57, 61, 54, 68, 51, 49, 64, 50, 48, 65. Okay, so that's just the first column, but go through and do that for all of these presidents, and then once you're finished, you can create your histogram. You can look and say, well, what's the most frequent? And use that to decide what's the maximum number that I want here. And then draw your histogram. And once again, I'm going to say, go ahead and just check the answers online to make sure that you got your answers right. But do the work yourself by hand first, and then go back and check it.